talking about other organizations that are concerned about climate change and rising temperatures, water scarcity, and so on. We have three distinguished panelists today. Walter Alejandro Sanchez from Second Floor Strategies. He's also a CSIS fellow. Sanjay Shrivastava, who is practice manager for environment, natural resources management, and the blue economy in Europe and Central Asia region from the World Bank. And Mary Melnick, environmental security and resilience division chief at the Asia Bureau of USAID. I will say a few words about them. And I don't see Sanjay yet, but hopefully he is going to be here soon. He's on his way. Walter Alejandro Sanchez is an analyst who focuses on geopolitical trade and defense and security issues across the Western Hemisphere, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. He is president of Second Floor Strategies, a consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. He is a freelance writer for the defense news agencies Breaking Defense, James, and Shepherd Media. He is also a member of the Center for International Maritime Security, for which he publishes a column titled The Southern Tide, about maritime security issues related to Latin America and the Caribbean. So his interests are really wide, from Latin America all the way to Central Asia. He's also a non-resident research associate at the
Expediente
Abierto. Sorry, my Spanish is not good. His analyses have appeared in numerous referred journals, including Science Review of International Affairs, Small Wars and Insurgencies, Defense Studies, and Polo Journal, and Journal of Slavic Military Studies, European Security Studies in Conflict and Terrorism, and so on. He has published book chapters on Bolivia foreign policy, separatism in Moldova, and Kazakhstan's economic diversification policies. And I'm going to introduce now Mary Melnick, who is Dr. Melnick is the Environmental Security and Resilience Division Chief of USAID Asia Bureau, and she has 30 years of experience working on community development, biodiversity conservation, and the environment in Latin America and Asia. She has been in the Asia Bureau since 2001 and is currently engaged in USAID efforts to address water security, glacier retreat, and the conservation of tigers and snow leopards. She has also developed and facilitated private sector alliances linking environmentally sustainable and security responsible products to markets. Past work has included a body of research analyzing forest conflicts in Asia. Her PhD is in ecological management from Imperial College of the University of London. So she has a lifetime experience in preserving the environment, and I'm so lucky to have you here today with us, given your really busy schedule. I will introduce Sanjay when he comes. Okay, he is just in, and just on time to introduce Mr. Sanjay Shrivastava, who is a practice manager for environmental natural resources and blue economy, global practice for Europe and Central Asia at the World Bank. He leads a large team of banks' engagement in lending and advisory support to promote green growth, addressing air, water, and land pollution, strategy to promote biodiversity and forest conservation, growing blue economy, and managing environmental risks across the bank's lending operations. Previously, he served as practice manager for ENV in West and Central Africa. He brings a vast global experience in devising environmental strategy and policy dialogue related to sustainable development, as well as hands-on experience addressing complex environmental challenges in several developing countries. So I really appreciate you taking part in our discussion today. And here I will start with Alex, who is going to talk about, actually he came up with the idea for Green 5+1 on environmental issues in Central Asia. So I'm going to turn to him and ask him to talk about regional cooperation in Central Asia, where this idea came from and what could be the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Stay. Correct. Okay. So greetings, everyone. Thank you very much, Margarita and the Jamestown Foundation for hosting this event on a very timely and important topic. The presentation will differ from other panels because it will not be an analysis of a situation, but rather I will discuss a proposal for the future. I am proposing a high-level summit between the United States and its 5 Central Asian partners to discuss environmental issues, including water security and climate change. I am calling this summit the Green 5+1. Let me elaborate on this idea, and I look forward to your thoughts and comments. Next slide, please. The United States and its Central Asian partners have discussed environmental issues several times in the past. In 2021, at the height of the COVID pandemic, the U.S. Special Representative Envoy for the Climate, John Kerry, held a virtual summit with his Central Asian partners. The key word here is virtual, not in person. Next slide, please. A statement following this virtual summit stated that, and I quote, the C5+1 governments affirmed the critical nature of the climate crisis faced by the world today. The 6 parties also pledged to continue, and I quote, improving water resource management and water quality, including water resource agreements and strengthening water diplomacy. And also to, and I quote, jointly address the ecological and socioeconomic situation of the Aral Basin. Finally, the 6 parties, next slide, please. Finally, the 6 parties, actually, can you go back? Sorry, thank you. Finally, the 6 parties reaffirmed their commitment to increase environmental cooperation within the framework of the C5+1 regional diplomatic platform. However, even though the joint statement at the end of this summit highlighted the need to increase environmental cooperation under the 5+1 format, this high-level environmental meeting has been held only once and virtually. Of course, as we have talked about before, there have been several other meetings and official visits where environmental issues, including green energy and water security, have been discussed. For example, the USAID Director, Samantha Power, visited Tashkent, Uzbekistan this past October to participate in a C5+1 regional connectivity ministerial. While commendable, the summit and bilateral meetings were aimed at promoting inclusive, sustainable economic development in the region. Climate and energy solutions were also discussed, but this recent C5+1 meeting did not focus on environmental issues specifically. Next slide, please. Now, let's go back in time very briefly. A mere development happened in September 2023, when the historic presidential C5+1 took place at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. The new declaration will serve as the blueprint for the future of U.S. Central Asia relations for the foreseeable future. Next slide, please. The text, as you can see on the screen, spends considerable time discussing environmental issues, including green energy and water security. For example, the text explains that the parties, and I quote, commit to redoubling efforts to increase clean energy production, methane mitigation projects, etc. The text also mentions, and I quote, we're invested in enhancing Central Asia's water security and environmental quality, working to increase regional cooperation on water and ecological issues that take into account food security, sanitation, agriculture, and energy sector linkages. As our partners have discussed, water security is a critical challenge for the future of the populations across Central Asia. USAID is mentioned numerous times in the declaration, explaining that, and I quote, through the USAID Regional and Vulnerable Environment Program, we plan to collaborate to address water, energy, food, and environmental needs that simultaneously combat climate change with appropriate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience measures. Next slide, please. So, I apologize for the font. It was bigger than I was expecting. So, let's review the situation and my idea very briefly. There is a document that supports greater integration, interaction, cooperation, and communication between the United States and the 5 Central Asian countries on environmental and green energy issues. The 5 Central Asian countries have varied environmental challenges, but there is also great potential for water cooperation and the development of green industries, including sustainable agriculture. Moreover, Central Asia can become a major producer of green energy, like solar power, while the region's richness regarding critical minerals and rare earth elements cannot be understated. Dialogue between Washington and the 5 Central Asian governments occurs to discuss climate change, green energy, and other environmental issues, as has been mentioned several times. However, these interactions should occur with more regularity at a more senior level. Hence, and I hate the fact that my final sentence was cut out, and that's where I do the little punchline. Hence, in my opinion, a series of Green 5+1 meetings will be useful. Next slide, please. So, okay, that image wasn't supposed to be in the middle of the slide. I apologize for that. Okay. So why is the Green 5+1 a good idea? By stating that a Green 5+1 summit occurs as part of the New York Declaration, we can keep this document alive and relevant. Two, it provides another alternative to maintain constant communication and dialogue at a high level between Washington and its Central Asian partners. Also, there is this question of diversity. We already have several meetings of C5+1s. As previously mentioned, last October, there was a C5+1 regional connectivity ministerial in Tashkent. In February of 2023, Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Astana for C5+1 ministerial in the Kazakhstani capital. Previously, there was another C5+1 ministerial in October 2022 during the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Of course, now we have a presidential C5+1, and as I have argued previously, a sitting US president should visit Central Asia for a presidential C5+1 in the region. This past March, there was Kazakhstan hosted the first ever Business 5+1. You can see a screenshot of the event. And this Business 5+1 was aimed at strengthening regional integration for businesses. Finally, the New York Declaration also mentioned the future of a C5+1 critical minerals dialogue. So, a Green 5+1 is another tool in the toolkit that relevant parties can utilize to maintain high-level communication between the 6 continents. In other words, high-level or senior meetings on environmental issues helps the diversification of the C5+1 framework into areas that require constant communication, dialogue, and cooperation. Discussing foreign policy, business, and investment opportunities is of course important, but we need to also focus on other issues that deserve more and require a constant flow of interactions. Next slide, please. Also, and to stress the obvious, a Green 5+1 can maintain and also expand Washington's attention on Central Asia. The region's visibility in the US capital decreased after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, but increased once again since the war in Ukraine commenced. Besides the presidential C5+1 summit, Secretary Blinken visited Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan last February 2023, not to mention other delegations from the United States that routinely go to Central Asia, or Central Asian delegations which come to Washington. Unsurprisingly, the topics that are often discussed are the sanctions against Russia, Trans-Caspian International Transport Route or Middle Corridor, and access to Central Asia's critical mineral and rare earth elements. I would like to see environmental issues added to the regular list of high-profile topics discussed between these 6 states, not just at a working group level, but by more senior officials. For example, with the inclusion, participation of Special Envoy Kerry, who should go to Central Asia for a Green 5+1 in situ in the region. Next slide, please. So now that I have explained why a Green 5+1 is important and necessary, let me talk about the where and the when it will happen. First of all, I want to stress that I do not want my idea of a Green 5+1 to be a single one-time summit. Like other initiatives, I would like these meetings to occur with regularity. Secondly, while a Green 5+1 summit can occur as a standalone meeting, I am personally in favor of these meetings occurring as part of a larger gathering. So here are some potential dates and locations, and I would love to hear your opinions about it. The first option is for the Green 5+1 to occur annually at rotating locations. For example, Washington can host the inaugural summit, followed by Astana, Tashkent, and then we can see if the other Central Asian governments are interested in hosting these meetings. 2. Another option is for the Green 5+1 to occur during major conferences. For example, as a side meeting during the annual United Nations General Assembly or during the annual COP gatherings on climate change. Anecdotally, the next COP29 will take place in Baku, Azerbaijan, which is the Caspian neighbor of Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. One problem with this option is that I would like to see the Green 5+1 occur in Central Asia, So more relevant actors and agencies can participate, including the affected populations, the populations who are affected by these natural disasters and climate change. However, if there is time and an opportunity for all 6 parties to meet in November in Baku under the CIFA+1 format, I fully support that option. Next slide, please. If I could advise Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, I will recommend him to invite the 5 other parties for the first ever Green 5+1 summit at the 2025 Astana International Forum. The forum was originally established in 2008 and called the Astana Economic Forum. The last version of the Economic Forum took place in 2019, and then there was a hiatus due to COVID. In 2023, the forum started once again with a different name, the Astana International Forum, and a broader scope. The AIF now aims to, and I quote, unite efforts to address key global challenges. The forum will serve as a platform for high-level delegates from foreign governments, international organizations, businesses, and academic circles to engage and seek solutions to problems such as climate change, food shortages, and energy security, end quote. The 2023 format already occurred the 2023 forum already occurred under this new format and vision. Next slide, please. And here, however, the 2020, you can see the pillars here of how it was supposed to look. Actually, let me rephrase. The 2023 forum occurred. The 2024 forum was cancelled, which it was scheduled to take place in June. However, President Tokayev cancelled it so that financial resources could be used in disaster relief after devastating floods occurred across several regions of Kazakhstan. I certainly think that this was the correct decision. But let me take you for a moment to the website of the 2024 forum. These are the topics or the pillars of the forum. And you will notice that one of them involves energy and climate change. Next slide, please. Also, if we see the 2023 forum's agenda, there were several panels which addressed the green economic transformation, green energy transition, and economic and environmental consequences of achieving carbon neutrality. In other words, the Astana International Forum has already a pillar, a green pillar, which should be exploited in the good sense of the word. And again, I am proposing that next year, the Astana International Forum should host a Green 5+1 summit, perhaps the inaugural meeting of this type of summits. Next slide, please. Now, allow me to develop the idea of a Green 5+1 at the 2025 AIF from a different perspective. And again, I will remind you that I have developed this proposal over the past months. It's still very much a work in progress, and I welcome your feedback. Now, let's be honest. There are a lot of conferences and summits across the world today. Those of us who live and work in Washington, D.C. know that very well. As I was preparing my speech and presentation, I started thinking about other major conferences that occur annually across Europe and Eurasia. We have the Munich Security Conference in Germany, which describes itself as the world's leading forum for debating international security policy. Then there is the Davos Economic Summit in Switzerland. Next slide, please. Meanwhile, moreover, the Institute of International Strategic Studies, based in London, organizes the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue, annually held in Singapore. The dialogue is Asia's premier defense summit. The 2023 dialogue featured a keynote address by Australia's Prime Minister and speeches by the U.S. Secretary of Defense and China's Minister of Defense. Meanwhile, Russia has organized the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum since 1997. And for obvious reasons, I doubt that either US or European policymakers will attend it anytime soon. Next slide, please. Moreover, there are other countries are also organizing their own forums to improve their global image. This past March, Turkey organized the third edition of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, an annual conference on international diplomacy. Some of the speakers included the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lebanon, of Mali, of Kuwait, and the Prime Minister of the National Unity Government of Libya. Moreover, this past March, Kazakhstan's neighbor Azerbaijan organized the 12th version of the Global Baku Forum. Some of the speakers included the President of Albania, the Director of the World Health Organization, the Executive director of UNAIDS, and who is also the Undersecretary of the United Nations, and also the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey. Hence, there is a friendly but understandable competition by each forum to be the premier meeting of its kind, with high-level speeches, dialogues, and agreements. Next slide, please. Next, please. Okay, I'm trying to wrap up very fast. So, and just like the Munich conference is known for focusing on defense issues, or Davos focuses on economic and financial affairs, the Star International Forum could become the premier conference that focuses on environmental issues, water security, and the green energy. I would like to say that one quick thing about dates. If you look at the dates, they're very interesting. The COP climate summits occur in November and December every year. In Dubai was in November of 2023, I believe. Then Baku will take place, the COP29 in Baku will take place in November as well. Meanwhile, the AIF, the Star International Forum, took place in June of 2023 and was scheduled to take place in June of 2024. I assume the forum will meet in 2025 around the same dates. In other words, every meeting of the AIF falls at a nice middle point between COP summits. Hence, this is the ideal time for a Green 5+1 to take place, so that the United States and its Central Asian partners can discuss environmental and green energy issues and discuss where the COP resolutions and agreements passed half a year before are being properly enforced, or if there are any problems with COP resolutions. Next slide, please. I only have two more, so I'm almost done. And I am sorry that quite a few of my slides got cut off. But I would like to propose that to make the first Green 5+1 even more timely, it should focus on water issues. Unfortunately, while communication and cooperation among Central Asian governments is increasing across several fields, water cooperation between Central states is declining. The border clashes between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan over access to water resources is a prime example of this situation. Hence, there has to be more dialogue and to promote trust between these countries, to find mutually beneficial answers to water-related solutions, to water-related problems. Having a Green 5+1 specifically aimed at water would be a great framework for discussion and for support of international law. Moreover, next slide, please. If a one or two Green 5+1 summits occur, I think there should be a Green 5+1+1. I'm allowed to play with the format a little bit, so that the International Fund for Saving the RLC can become a participant. In other words, this is because I believe that IFAS has proved to be a great asset for promoting dialogue and action on water issues in the RLC basin. As for the Green 5+1, if a summit occurs on water issues, perhaps it could conclude with a memorandum of understanding and cooperation on water flows. The 5 Central Asian governments need to discuss issues like droughts, water consumption, irrigation projects, declining rainfall, and the construction of new reservoirs, which affect the flow of water to neighboring countries. Discussing the access and usage of water is a sensitive topic in Central Asia, but I want to believe that having Washington promote constructive dialogue on water issues with its Central Asian partners can lead to positive breakthroughs. This is one more reason why I believe a Green 5+1 can be very helpful to Central Asia. Now, last slide, my conclusions. To conclude, let me summarize my proposal. The time has come for a high-level framework meeting that promotes dialogue on a regular basis between the United States and Central Asian countries, with a focus on the environmental, water, and green energy issues. The new declaration, which will be the blueprint for the future of Washington's interactions with Central Asia, must be kept alive and remain relevant. Interactions, including high-level meetings between Washington and Central Asian partners, must continue to diversify, not solely focusing on foreign policy or business and investment affairs, but also to address other topics like the environment. A Green 5+1 will achieve all these goals. There's plenty of real estate in the calendar of annual events where a Green 5+1 could occur, perhaps as part of a larger gathering. While the Green 5+1 should arguably be open only to the relevant government officials, subsequent summits should expand to allow side gatherings with other relevant actors in affected communities. Hence, it is vital for the Green 5+1 to occur in situ in Central Asia, so that the people of these 5 nations have an opportunity to voice their opinions, ideas, and concerns as well. A mere conference like the Star International Forum is an ideal location for the first Green 5+1 in Central Asia, and provides a broad stage for more dialogue. The United States interactions with its 5 Central Asian partners are evolving, given new developments, new crises, and new opportunities. Similarly, the environment and the effects of climate change are no longer a possibility, but a very part of everyday life. Hence, the Green 5+1 can be a vital tool for the United States and its Central Asian partners to find solutions to common problems. Thank you so much. And I apologize for going over time.
It's okay. Thank you, Alex. Thank you. It's a really interesting idea. The good thing is that the Astana Economic Forum is also already developing this green pillar, which is a cue to us, as we talked in the previous panel, that unless private companies are engaged in preserving the environment of Central Asia, in reducing methane emissions, in designing ways to save water in agriculture and in industry, nothing is going to change just by dialogue between diplomats on any side, on all sides. The diplomatic dialogue is extremely important, nevertheless, to set the frame and the tone and to expand this work to private sector, non-profit organizations, international banking institutions, and most importantly to the people of Central Asia, who very often are not aware about the problems that they have, and they are not organizing themselves to find solutions to the problems of the region. And I will turn now to Mary, because she's representing USAID, a very interesting initiative that is a tool to monitor water resources and water management. So we're moving from ideas of diplomatic dialogue, to concrete work that the US government is doing in the region, and then we'll turn to the World Bank with the incredible work that they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margarita. And that's actually a perfect segue. Margarita is indicating some of our most recent work. What I would like to do, maybe as an outline for just my brief remarks, is I'm looking at the agenda and the two areas. One, Central Asia becoming part of the solution, which is the actions, and reflecting. I hope throughout this presentation remarks, I'm able to emphasize the important work that the governments of Central Asia are actually standing up, leading, and contributing. And USAID, as a development partner of these countries, is helping to support the technical assistance, some data, organizing, convening, to help achieve the C5 countries' development goals. So I want to highlight the countries themselves are the main leaders in some of the actions, and then some of the details about USAID's response, given that leadership role and the importance of water security in the region, some of the tools that we've done. Perhaps if it's of any help, because I imagine your discussions this morning were very wide-ranging, and I'd also like to pick up on what our State Department colleague Brian Stimler had indicated this morning as well. The United States obviously has been with the process for many, many years. Even through the current turbulent times, USAID's presence in the region has been increasing, the stature of our missions increasing, and actually the high-level visits. Mr. Sanchez certainly indicated that administrative power has been out there. I lead the Division for Environmental Security and Resilience in the Asia Bureau, and our own Asia Bureau leadership at USAID has frequently traveled to the region to elevate the importance, despite all of the turmoil in the world today. So we stand ready. At the beginning of C5+1 process, obviously there's a working group on energy and the environment. So I would like to dig down and provide some of more of the action-oriented data activities with respect to water security. We started some of this work around, say, 2010-11. We knew that glaciers and their disappearance was going to be a critical issue. And there were many scientists and researchers who were actually measuring these glaciers are retreating, and the Central Asian Republic's own Soviet-trained scientists had deep fonts of knowledge, data, and information in the Russian language scientific literature on the state. But obviously, in the breakup of the Soviet Union, there had been a bit of a break in the financing and the funding of that scientific research. So we at USAID, as a development agency, yes, we're aware that glaciers are retreating, but the principal question is what happens to the water supply? How much water is already coming from those glaciers, from the snowpacks associated with glaciers and precipitation? Because as development planners, how do we manage for hydroelectric production, irrigation, or even urban centers' water supply without understanding how much water comes down? And so we, during the sort of 2011, 2012, for those of you who may remember, former President Obama went to Copenhagen at the Conference of the Parties and helped catalyze the Copenhagen Accord. And glaciated countries were specifically referenced in that accord. So as a result, USAID received significant funding to address this glacier issue. And what we did at USAID is, well, we worked in South and Central Asia. So every country in Central Asia, plus South Asian mountain countries, Pakistan, India, and Nepal. We worked with respective universities as well as hydromets. And I think in Central Asia, you're aware several countries have an institute of water problems. And we worked with them to begin reinstating the monitoring of glaciers and the water flows coming from the mountains. At that time, the problem was that you needed supercomputers, and we worked with the University of Colorado with that. So from about 2012 to 2018, we can figure out a way to share the data and research and the results and the reports for everyone who are interested in history. And I'd like to just pick up on this strand from Margarita's comments. So fast forward, most recently, and last summer particularly, we began working with Dr. Agor Gafurov, and he has an Institute of Water Innovations. And he developed, some of you may be aware of the MOD Snow tool, which monitors snowpack on mountains. He modified that tool to include glaciers, as well as looking at changes in time and different areas, and for the scientists in the room, including the temporal and spatial changes. So what has resulted is that he's able to develop, he has a program now that is currently being trained and we have trained and is being used to some degree by hydrometeorological departments. Oh, to apologize if I turn up. In the region, a program that you can put on your desktop computer or laptop, and government staff can monitor real-time the water flows from the region. So now we have almost instantaneous data that can help those who are managing water and making decisions on water. What are we anticipating? To some degree, we're even pushing the envelope and beginning to predict the unpredictable. You have a little bit of data ahead of time to indicate whether you may have problems with floods. And it's particularly important water management tool. So we've just finished that activity. Hopefully in the near future, we will be able to do a little bit more. Our missions offices in Central Asia are also doing quite a bit of on the ground, quite literally significant work in the area. You've heard mentioned, I've at least this morning by Mr. Stimler, as well as by Mr. Sanchez, the wave activity that USAID is contributing to from the Central Asia Regional Mission in Almaty, the water in vulnerable environments. And they have a whole host of activities from sub-basin transboundary dialogue, addressing this concern that has been raised about water is a flashpoint for potential conflict or even indications of past conflict. And so how do you begin some of these dialogues? And for those who track water is highly complicated, right? So you have people at the local level, at the cross-border level, sub-basin, basin. So our office there in Almaty is moving forward on that. They're also working on the environmental restoration of the ROC, a program called ERAS. They've been giving out a series of sub-grants on integrated river basin water management as well as looking at, I think one topic that's and the words that are often used are the water energy food nexus, right? The water is critical. for the energy supplies of these high mountain areas, the hydroelectric production, and the irrigation and sometimes very arid conditions, certainly in the area. And we're dealing with both factors such as the significant drying of the Aral Sea due to human impact and actions, as well as climate change being a threat multiplier and exacerbating factor of what is going to be the future of water in the region. I do want to also focus, perhaps, I don't know to what extent this has been addressed here, and to throw in my snow leopards, as was given in the introduction. When USAID was looking at this problem of climate change and impacts on high mountain areas, and particularly the loss of glaciers, the one thing that we think of from a development agency is the fact that there are many high mountain communities, and they will be the first to feel the impact of any changes in water supply immediately coming off snowpacks and glaciers. And from a development perspective, or perhaps even a financial perspective, you know, they are very sparsely populated. You hit many more millions of people working in Dhaka than you do in a mountainous area abutting a glacier. So what do you do? And also the way we were thinking of development at the time is that financial resources are scarce. So how do you get multiple benefits from one action? And so the action that we chose was the conservation of snow leopard habitat. There are communities in these areas. Now, for those who are scientists, you know, snow leopards are not roaming the glaciers. We understand there's not geographic overlapping precisely. Yet the snow leopard habitat is in headwater areas of certain streams beneath the glaciers and snowpacks. They traverse the snowpacks, and that if we know we are at grave and it's already proving now immediate risk of a loss of water supply, then we need to do everything we can and look for every tool in the toolbox to address this problem. So when we felt that it was very important and urgently important to implement strategies and approaches for watershed management and watershed conservation. So the vehicle for which was the snow leopard, at the same time working with the high mountain communities for adaptive measures for their different pastoral animals, at the same time reducing human-animal conflict, protecting the snow leopard. So the multiple wins is that you're supporting communities and adapting to a changing climate, reductions in water flow, as well as conserving endangered species now listed as threatened. Again, for those who really know the details of this, it's now listed as threatened by the IUCN, no longer endangered, and also contributing to watershed management. Now, I want to just reflect on one part of the leadership aspect of this. USAID had funded activities for snow leopard conservation in several countries, including the Kyrgyz Republic. And the Kyrgyz Republic has taken a leadership role on a global snow leopard and ecosystem protection program, which to this day, and absent great deals of donor funding, is still alive and going exceptionally well. So again, I really want to truly recognize the leadership of different countries in Central Asia. And in this particular case, the Kyrgyz Republic holds the Secretariat for the Global Snow Leopard Initiative. So why am I saying that? You know, I'm not sure which areas of this work that all of you engage in, but what I'd like to do is just share this information with you to present ideas that when we're talking about water management and water security, it may not be exclusively about dams, reservoirs, canals, that there's a much broader area of looking at this. And then you have the compounding factor of the drying of the Aral Sea. So I think I perhaps have covered everything. We hope to continue in these lines of efforts. And I'm happy to put you in contact with our staff in Almaty or Dushanbe or or Bishkek, who are also familiar with these, are more familiar than I in some of these topics. Thank you, Margarita.
Thank you very much, Mary. She's also a zoologist. I didn't mention that. This is why she is interested in these complex measures to preserve the environment and to preserve the flora and fauna as well. And seeing how the shepherds have to climb higher and higher in the mountains to find better grass for their flocks, one can tell how the water shortages, the droughts, how the temperature rising is affecting everything, including nomadic, traditional life of breeding cattle and breeding sheep. And now I'm going to turn to Sanjay precisely with this row of questions, these important questions about preserving the environment and also developing sustainable economy. And as he's working on blue economy, this is going to be very interesting to our audience to hear what the World Bank is seeing as the future of Central Asia in terms of economic development. But one thing I wanted to mention before you start, in this morning, two ideas came very forcefully about what Central Asia needs to do. First, urgent measures to preserve the environment. One was to tackle the methane emissions, and two was to stop producing cotton, figure out what else to produce, but not produce cotton, which is taking a lot of water. And with this, I'm turning it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Margarita, and thank you, fellow panelists. As my name indicates, I'm Sanjay. I lead the environment group for the World Bank for whole of Europe and Central Asia. And I'm also joined by my lead environmental economist, Paula Agostini, who's actually, I requested her to join me because she has worked in Central Asia country for at least 6 years, if not longer, while I joined only last year this the region. But anyway, I'll be making some quick PowerPoint presentation, which we actually discussed, but I'm not going to go through all of it, just to leave some time for more questions, specific. If you can, yeah, up there. Okay, yeah, just keep going to the next one. So I think we will talk primarily about the priorities, the challenge, and what we are doing actually. I think also, unfortunately, I didn't join this morning, but I think there are lots of discussion about how the climate risks are sort of multiplying the overall security environment, and that relates to what we do and what we've been discussing also as part of strategy. But anyway, just in terms of priorities, I don't know how many of you know how the World Bank is organized, but we organize by different regions. So Europe and Central Asia region covers all this country, and Central Asia, we call it a country management unit. So we have a ground presence in all those 5 countries. We have more than 50 staff based there, with the country director based there. A lot of technical and the sector people are based in Washington, DC and other places. But also we have a very strong lending or a portfolio of lending there. I think if one were to count it, it's like close to about $5 to $6 billion of investment into different sectors. And we use different tools to engage with our client countries. Well, primarily 3, I think for better or worse. First is that we have a tool called development policy lending. Essentially, these are budget support. So what we provide budget support to all these countries, but in lieu of budget support, we actually focus on key policy and institutional action that will green the economy. So I think we call this green DPOs or the green DPO. So I think we have plenty of those DPL programs engagement where focus on energy sector. So we extract a lot of, for example, the subsidy reduction in the energy sector. Or in water sector, we also talk about how to provide the right kind of pricing, how to make utilities more functional. Or it is on agriculture side. So we are also removing the dirty subsidies into creating incentive for more greening or bringing agriculture smart technology. So that's one set of instrument. The second set of instrument is what we call as a lending instrument. Please go to the next slide. So we call it lending instrument. Yeah, go next. Exactly. and which is where we do direct projects. So we have plenty of projects in the environment, and I'll be listing some of those projects, what we are doing on those, particularly on what we heard from you all on the water side, on restoring the degraded landscape, including some of it is on the snow leopard and monitoring of the glaciers, as well as also trying to restore forest, try to restore some of the pasture lands, also try to bring in more economic and community-driven activities so that we can reduce the dependence on natural resources and stuff. And the third area, because the lending is also limited in terms of their borrowing capacity, but we do use what we call as a technical assistance or a policy dialogue. So we do what we call as economic sector work, and we have plenty of those economic sector work. We have lots of critical dialogue that Paula and his team led, which is actually to really analyze the landscape of where the hotspots are. But primarily, I think going quickly through my presentation, we realize as part of our economic sector engagement, three key priorities are emerging: diversification and green transition. We know that the economies are very fossil fuel dependent. They're also a lot of cotton dependent, or or the agriculture produce dependent that have huge carbon footprint. So our strategy is to advise them on how do they move into green transition, how do they diversify their economy into sectors which do not have that kind of carbon footprint. The second is to create more and better jobs. So I think a lot of jobs are associated with fossil fuel. So I think how can we create green jobs, better jobs, can we have better understanding? And then also the inclusion process. Given the whole governance setup, we also are very aware of the fact that if the citizens have better voice, I think probably the economy will start to get more greener. Next slide, please. Next, please. So in terms of key challenge, I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures and a couple of. So we all know that the whole of Central Asia has got mountains and steppes, and if you can see those, they're on the eastern side, you will see lots of mountains. And if you travel west, I think you will see a lot of steppes. You will see a lot of vast land, and I think as Mary mentioned, also huge amount of land. I mean, I also worked in Bangladesh. I was posted for 3 years, and I guess every square kilometer has got 2,400 people living in there. Compared to that, I think it's like 1 person per square kilometer. So it's really a huge amount of landscape, but then most of this landscape is degraded. I think the reality is that these are not productive landscapes. So how do we bring them into productive landscape? Also, a huge amount of land degradation along the borders. And so I think not only that, but also I think people in the rural areas do not have access to the same level of prosperity. Although one might say, okay, the per capita income, for example, in Kazakhstan is a middle income country, but if you go into rural area or rural landscape, I think you will see a very different one. The other thing is, if you see, we did, and this is actually taken from Paula's report, which we actually completed only a few months ago. We did a detailed analysis and collected a lot of data on every district and every region, and you use the modern tools and use Bella and other modeling methods to really see the vulnerability of the land. What are the different climate risks and vulnerability associated with the land, and where are these lands located? So we call them hotspot analysis. So we did all the red things that you see are the hotspots, and we also created a menu of intervention. We also tried to do costing, how much it is going to cost, and we also did a prioritization in terms of what would be the cost benefit if one were to invest into it, both in terms of protection of the environment, climate risk mitigation, as well as community development. So I think we have that report and it's freely available. But if doing nothing, actually essentially is going to cost them close to about 4% of average GDP. Water, you want to add something, Paula, at this stage?
I just want to say that most of the degraded land is on the borders between countries. So that's an important point in terms of what you're just saying, regional collaboration, right? The focus of this,
right,
on this workshop.
Yeah. And water, we all have been discussing, Mr. Sanchez has been discussing water, Mary, you've been discussing water. It's one of the lowest water use efficiency rates. We all know that, water can be a source of real conflict. and it's a trigger, potential trigger. We're working on, we've been working very deeply on water sharing and collaboration, and we have several forums, and we have a lot of data monitoring. We try to bring in people, the senior leadership, Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Water Resources, occasionally to talk to them, and that is not the easiest thing. We can get you more details in terms of how these water dialogue happen, not only, but then how it links up to the energy such as Rogun and other things. But yeah, but then in terms of doing nothing or do nothing, RLC, you can see how the shrinking of RLC is happening. From 1960 to 89 to 2009 to 2025, I think it has become just a figure of what it used to be only about 50 years ago. Caspian Sea, very similar situation. We know key drivers of Caspian Sea degradation is overfishing. The damming has happened. Also the pollution, because a lot of pollution is coming from the rivers, not only from the Central Asian countries, but also from Russia in the north. Huge amount of pollution is pouring into Caspian Sea. It is impacting the coastal communities. We have some programs, but we don't have enough. I think the needs are serious. It runs into billions of dollars. And what we are doing is only testing or operating at the edge in terms of testing or setting up some pilot or piloting some institutional model to show that solutions can be brought in. And there is more need for adaptation to address the climate change. As we all know, I think this is no brainer. I think we all know that between 2000 and 2050, there will be close to 3.5 degrees centigrade of change of the temperature, which actually also will impact huge amount of precipitation changes, and that will impact the agriculture productivity, that will impact the disaster risk occurrence, that will impact the infrastructure, the existing infrastructure, whether they're going to be sustainable. So we have also done needs assessment in terms of financing need to address some of those climate change, and it comes in several billions of dollars to upgrade and to really address some of those issues, and particularly related to food security, water security, and energy security. Also, this is just a graph to show that carbon emission intensity in Central Asian countries is relatively much higher. As you see Turkmenistan, you can see Kazakhstan, and obviously, I mean, it's no brainer. One knows that these are oil dependent economies with huge reliance on oil product, not only but also inefficiencies in other sectors such as food production or water management. So, and that once you start to measure the success in terms of can we bring down the CO2 carbon intensity, I think that would how we will measure. One problem that has not been talked quite often is the whole regional air quality. I come from India, and everyone knows about Delhi air pollution is world famous. I had no clue. I thought okay, now I start to work in Central Asia, it's probably going to clean. I was very surprised that look at the ranking, the global ranking of the cities in Central Asia. They're like 44, the Bishkek and the Almaty, I think they're also, go there in winter. Everyone from Minister of Finance to Prime Minister is talking about air pollution. Come summer, people forget about it. Again, next winter. So we are doing something about it. We just did a regional engagement in terms of what kind of policy need to be streamlined on the energy subsidy side, also in terms of setting up new standard for NOx and SOx, also PM 2.5, have better monitoring network, and also did a source apportionment study in terms of which are the sources contributing to the most amount of PM 2.5 and what portion is generated due to dust storms, but then what portion is man-made and what we can fix. We also have a big lending program, $50 million, I'll show you, where we're trying to address some of these household heating related systems. So these are some of our program. Oh. Okay, this is the resilient program. Why is it not on my screen? So this is the Resilient Landscape Program, which is an umbrella program. It's a regional program. It's a $242 billion of soft loan. Plus, we also have trust fund, close to $13 million trust fund from Pro Green Resources, which is the World Bank donors, and also $5 million from other sources. So a huge amount of money is being pumped in. We have also got in GF. So we have engagement in Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. I think, and I'll only talk about the challenges when we would develop the series of program. It was not developed all at once because it was done country by country. And the biggest problem was, and Paula can talk more because she was the one who led all the different dialogue, they were unwilling to collaborate. For example, there's a large portion of each country program is the regional collaboration. So they get money in their country only if they collaborate with others, which is about sharing the data on water, sharing the data on agriculture or on the land degradation. Also, I think in terms of finding common capacity and common policy set. Paula, you want to add a few sentences on this?
Yeah, so it has a strong focus on regional collaboration at two levels. One, physically on transboundary corridors and creation of peace parks or working where you have shared infrastructures like roads that needs to have on both sides of the border some intervention of sustainable land management so they are not going to be affected by climate change, or you have protected areas that are joined. And then what Sanjay was saying, really working on the policy side and on the data side together. So common protocols for fire management on both sides, common protocols for managing the biodiversity, that you can have some antelopes that are crossing among borders, or just managing the watershed together and similar things, and the data and a lot of data sharing. So that's how we're working now through this program. So it's a series of national projects, but with a very strong regional component in each of the projects.
Next slide, please. So obviously these pictures only to give you a glimpse of what is the outcome. You know, we invest so much of money. What is the change in the graph? So we clearly have focus on a lot of regional infrastructure in terms of taking into account what is going to be the future climate related risk. For example, if there's going to be, rather than 1 in 100 years, there's going to be 1 in 50-year chances of flooding. So accordingly, the new infrastructure, whether it is water supply or sanitation or transportation, needs to take into account those modeling risk of climate risk. And that's how we are focusing a lot on creating regional infrastructure. A lot of focus is on enhancing the agricultural productivity with lesser inputs and with cleaner inputs. And that also means that, helping farmers use the same land to produce more with less input. So we're focusing on transboundary ecosystems and CO2 mitigation, which essentially is trying to bring some of these degraded land with more forestry and reforestation and afforestation initiative involving the communities, increasing the resilience of border rural communities so that we can reduce their reliance on extracting or reliance on the natural resources, and grow back greener, which are also talking about training and educating through an education program with the younger communities on bringing in better sustainable land management practices and focus on tourism. Next slide, please. So this is no surprise. Everyone probably knows about it. We are also involved in it, but then there are multiple partners involved in the Rogun Dam. It's been under discussion for a long time, but also I think we are proposing about $400 million of direct financing on some of the elements. But before that, we have been engaged for the last 10 years on technical assistance, advising them on several areas in terms of understanding how is the water going to be impacted because of the glacial melt. Is there going to be flow or more sediments coming into those? Is there going to be sustainability, or is there going to be impact on downstream cotton growers? Or what is going to be the demand side? Who's going to use this energy? If South Asia is going to be, and we have also been investing into what we call as a CASA 1000, which is 1,000 kilometers of transmission line taking power. But then the power load in South Asia has got its own political conflict between India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Afghanistan. So can we match the load centers with the supply without having impact on the farming communities that have traditionally relied on cotton growing? So lots of studies been done. Some of them are publicly available. We're happy to share with you. but I think we are proceeding ahead, going fully well. It's a very high risk, politically risky, politically sensitive engagement, but we are moving ahead with this. Next slide, please. We're also doing, this is like 64 billion in total financing. We, on the Aral Sea Basin, we are focusing on the information portal. We have benefited more than 15,000 people. It was a small pilot project where we demonstrated that how leveling of the land and how sort of addressing some of the concerns related to productive practices, agriculture practice, can really enhance the productivity in farmers' income. And that's like really resilient climate resilient practices. And that has worked very well, and the government is going to expand some of those. But this was a very small pilot project. We can't claim that it has shown result at a scale one would like to see. Next, please. Okay, and this is another blowing the Caspian Sea GF project. Paula, you want to talk about it?
So we received a lot of requests from the governments of the countries around the Caspian Sea about issues related to lowering of the water level of the Caspian Sea due to climate change and with a lot of pollution coming from the rivers. So they approached us for the preparation of the very first initial, very small $12 million project to work with Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan to address these issues. And it's really just starting, the preparation just starting. And we hope that will be a good platforms to then bring more development partners and more actions in the Caspian Sea, given also their interest that is there for the middle corridor, so for using, through going through, with the railways arriving at the ports in Aktau in Kazakhstan and crossing it over all the way to Baku. So it's important that the Caspian Sea is healthy, that the water don't continue to go down, and that we address also the issues, potential issues, or even more pollution and biodiversity loss in the Caspian Sea. So it's just starting. We hope it will be a good platform.
Thank you. Next one. Okay, this is the air quality project, which was approved about 6 months ago by our board, but $50 million lending to Kyrgyz Republic. So we're focusing on Bishkek city, which is about primarily addressing some of the household heating, because they use dirty boilers and dirty fuel. So we're trying to create a financing tool, an instrument which actually mixes a bit of grant element into commercial lending, so that we are creating a market so that the people would be willing to borrow more to change to heat pump, basically. So which is a modern technology and that will have impact mostly on the indoor air pollution, but also would gradually start to impact the ambient air quality. But then only one point to mention that, this is a pilot for one city, but it needs to be expanded to the whole Kyrgyzstan. But there's also transboundary. There's a huge transboundary. There's a balloon effect. You can't just fix air quality in one city and think the problem is solved, because then the pollution will flow from the other parts into your city anyway. So I think there is a huge regional phenomena, and then people start to complain saying, oh, my air pollution is bad, or air quality is bad because of my neighbors. So it is also one of the factors that drives the conflict. So I think one would need to address it more holistically and regionally and bring it as part of the dialogue, as you were saying. Next, please. Okay, these are some of these diagnostics and reports and the dialogue series, and these are all available. Please let us know. Focuses on circular economy, air quality, landscape restoration, in different degradation of mountains to country forestry notes. So these are not a desk study. These are studies that are backed by very strong data and data collection and partnership with the client side. And these have been released and disseminated, and it has influenced several of our policy dialogue. But these are available for discussion. Next, please. Okay, the CCDR, or the Country Climate and Development Report, is a relatively new tool that the World Bank has started using in last 2 years. So we have started to say that the country climate development report is so strongly linked to climate, and vice versa. The development is impacted by climate, and the climate is impacted by the development. So in order to understand this nexus of different sectors, how their export policies, how their subsidies in different sectors, how their sectoral investment, how their different hotspot treatment relates to climate, and how the changing climate is going to impact the labor market, for example. Will there be, for example, we did similar studies in Africa where we found that the labor productivity will go down because the number of hours that the labor can work during the day is getting shortened because of the high extreme temperature. Similarly, the water is going to impact, the water availability is going to impact the vector borne or the health response system. So I think we understand all these nexus. So we produce for every country now, almost every 2 years. So we have launched the CCDR for several of these countries in Central Asia, and some of them are available. For example, Kazakhstan, some of them are in the works. So we'll be happy to collaborate or happy to share information as they get available. I think that's about it. Next slide, please. Okay, so at the long term, I think these are the summary of we are trying to pursue economic transformation and regional. We realize that Central Asia is less integrated, and then we're trying to bring in that integration so that the economic policy are consistent across, and that is where the regional cooperation will happen. The better job agenda remains very important, but also linked to climate is a very, very important factor. And when I say climate, I think one can translate into what happens in agriculture, hydropower generation, water security, etc. Climate becomes very centerpiece of any dialogue that we have on them. Let me stop there, and thank you so much for all this.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And this is such an interesting presentation of all of you. All of your remarks and presentations were really very enriching. Let me ask you the first question, and we'll open now for discussion. How do you assess the regional cooperation between the governments of Central Asia on green matters at the moment? Water preservation, land restoration, pollution restrictions, and so on. What is your assessment of their willingness to work together on these matters? And the second question is, do you see involvement by the communities as well? Then, please.
Thank you. Big question. So I'll just follow up within the context of my earlier remarks. Historically, many countries in Central Asia, as well as South Asia, I mean, there are the issues of the data sharing. So when in 2012, when we began working with each of the countries and their hydromet or water problems institutes, it was a new field trying to understand how much water is flowing from glaciers and snowpacks. So all of the countries were in the room together for the trainings. And so there was the opportunity that everyone had their data and were there. But at that stage, so there was no hesitance in sharing data, but at that very early stage, each country was trying to understand its own individual situation with its own basins. So I think there was great camaraderie, and the project was called CHARIS, CHARIS, standing for Contributions of High Asia Runoff from Ice and Snow. That there was a social networking and a cohesion among these research institutions. However, the scientific data, the first step is my river basins. And so I think, despite the fact that even in the morning, my previous remarks were highlighting the data and the development problem and the challenge, I think what's yet unwritten that I've had in the back of my head is the social capital that was built at that time. So I think we're at that stage where, among researchers, unless they get directions, I am not feeling the sort of negative, sort of pushback on the sharing. So I think there's lots to grow there. And then also on the water resource management side, I think there's a tremendous tool and opportunity through the Global Snow Leopard and Ecosystem Protection Program, because it is intergovernmental. And all of the countries are coming to the table together when the acronym is GSLEP, the GSLEP. When the GSLEP started, there was a Bishkek Declaration. And every subsequent ministerial or even summit meeting There's usually one or two or three presidents, some are prime ministers, not the whole summit. There's a declaration. And I think that is an important tool for transboundary water security and water management. So I think it'll be important. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you notice the same, Sanjay, and of course, Paula, sorry, I remember your second name.
Yeah, no, I think again, from our side, I think it's not complete reluctance or resistance to collaboration. I think our clients, government clients, government representatives are pretty clever, and they know what to extract most. And they often see a reason. They said that, okay, what's the benefit for collaboration? They have to see the benefit. So there are certain areas where they have yielded and they're willing to collaborate. Water being one area. So I think I won't say they're 100% transparency in sharing all the data, but all the relevant data. And now I think in 30 years, we've always worked on water data sharing. It's been controversial. But now there's so many other sources of data that, obviously to hide a flow data or the variation data is very, very difficult. So a lot of data sharing is happening. We have a lot of hydromet stations also cutting across the region. We also have regional agenda on snow leopard or glacier monitoring. I think that's where we are working. But there are certain areas where I think it was very difficult for them to sort of put money equally. Paula may want to come in on the whole technical assistance and capacity building.
Yeah, so basically, if I look at some of the examples that Sanjay shared, and particularly the regional resilient landscape program, certainly in the last few years, there have been a lot of more collaboration than before. But it's sometimes one country with another country, and not all the 5 countries together. Maybe it's on a specific topic, because that's where really feel the need to work on, this, as I was telling you, the fire fighting protocol, because it's in the interest of both, so they can do a memorandum of understanding on that specific topic. It's more difficult to have a more comprehensive work. There is a lack, as you all know, of regional organizations. We are working always with CAREC, the Central Asia Environment Center, which is a very good one, but it has its limitation. It doesn't have the status of an international organization. So the World Bank, for example, was not able to provide to them a grant as a regional organization. They work together with IFAS. And IFA has its own challenges because they change every year. They change their headquarters, etc. Some countries don't like IFAS. So we are trying to build regional organizations through this national program, which is difficult because they see the national program is something national. Say, why should we subsidize the regional entity? So there are challenges, but I can certainly see much more willingness to work together than before. And it has been a few years since the president of Central Asia got together, and in terms of where we work, there are some partnerships like the UN Partnership for Ecosystem Restoration that is working there, that has been subscribed by all the countries. So all these things is helping in the right direction. More work to be done.
Thank you. Please, here, the first question.
Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Sanat. I'm from Astana, Institute for Strategic Studies. My question is related to the topic of our session, Central Asia becoming part of the solution. And how about elephant in the room, Afghanistan? Because Afghanistan is a significant part of the water issues in the region. There's a significant part of the tributary of the flow of Amudari River from Afghan side of Afghanistan. How about this country? Because I think it seems to me we should engage Afghanistan in our regional dialogue, inter-regional dialogue, international level also, I think, because without Afghanistan, I don't know, can we successfully resolve many issues in water level?
You're absolutely right. Afghanistan and Pakistan also have very serious problems with rising temperatures and climate change. The Middle East and Central Asia, including Afghanistan and Pakistan, are probably number one in the world that need urgent action on climate change. And water scarcity is part of the problem. And you're absolutely right. There has to be engagement on these issues, and that could be a good way, a good venue to engage together Central Asia with Afghanistan on the water. And I agree with
In the
you.
foreseeable future, we will faced with new challenges from Afghan side. You know about the Koshtipa channel and the plans of Afghan side to withdraw water from the Amur River. Few Afghan policymakers, Taliban's government said that the 30% of the Amur Darya river flow shaping in the Afghan side. It's very huge numbers.
I'll just add really quickly that you said you used the key word. The problem is not Afghanistan, it's the Taliban. Is that governments don't want to engage with the Taliban. If we were talking about before the fall of the previous government, that would be a different question. Obviously, we know about the tensions between Tajikistan and the Taliban, and I'm not saying tensions between Tajikistan and Afghanistan, tensions between the Taliban and Tajikistan. So I'm seeing a kind of cooperation there. There are, of course, concerns about where the Taliban, maybe ISIS or some of these splinter groups that have found a temporary base or home in Afghanistan can use that as a launching pad to sometimes have to maybe enter neighboring countries like Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. There have been some incidents along the border. So are these countries, are the governments of Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan willing to really engage with the Taliban, or are they just going to try to kind of block them out? I think just it's easy for us to discuss the Taliban in such an abstract manner because again we're not the neighbor. The US is not a neighbor of Afghanistan. So there's going to have to be reluctant cooperation, reluctant dialogue, and just because there's no other way between especially Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan with the Taliban. Dialogue between Tajikistan and the Taliban, I don't see that happening, at least anytime soon. Maybe if climate change makes the situation so intolerable that both sides say, okay, we need to talk to each other and cooperate with each other, maybe that will happen.
Maybe we have to separate our ideological, political controversies with Afghan side, because we are not happy also with negotiate with the Taliban government, but we should to talk because we don't have time to wait.
I think Central Asian countries have better rapport and better interaction with the Taliban government than anybody else. Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly right. What we've seen in the last year, I mean, the region's just changing so much over the last several years, but the last 2 years, it's accelerated, and in the last year, it's gone up exponentially. And one of those changes is engagement with the Taliban, where when the U.S. Left Afghanistan, there was almost a panic in Central Asia. That's calmed down significantly. And we're actually seeing engages at the diplomatic level, which again, not giving recognition, but at the same time recognizing that there needs to be engagement. And you know, the Koshtipa Canal is kind of the tip of the iceberg, if I could do that. The Ili River going through China. I mean, Kazakhstan, southern Kazakhstan had very poor crops because a lot of the water was diverted to China last year. A huge issue. The Caspian is going down at historic levels. Well, Russia's not allowing enough water in. Kazakhstan has put in desalination plants. Iran has put in desalination plants. The Turkmen have put in, sorry, I was going around, I missed that one. The Turkmen have, and the Azeris all have, because everybody is experiencing these massive droughts. And the water is just, the water going into the region is declining. And that is a significant challenge to the ability for countries to employ people to actually have living standards accommodating regions that will support people. You know, Turkey last year had a 50% rise in the cost of goods because their crops failed because of the massive drought. Pakistan mentioned had an 80% decline in fresh water available in the country over the last 20 years. Huge declines. China is similar. And this whole region is suffering. And so one of the things I think that's fascinating is the 5 Central Asian countries wouldn't even begin to discuss water. I would say 7, 8 years ago, we had President Rahman sort of leading the charge at the UN, but there really wasn't much engagement from everyone else. They would sort of go individually, but they wouldn't talk together. We've seen that change significantly now, where the 5 countries are actually talking about it. I think COP coming up in Baku becomes a major opportunity, a lightning rod for all of these countries, I hope, to actually do a Caspian area discussion that hopefully will lead to maybe a more mature discussion about what to do about water.
Thank you. Please ask your questions. We have a few more minutes to the end of this panel, and I'm sure there is interest in those very burning issues. And I'm really hopeful that a lot of people learned a lot from this discussion today about the problems of Central Asia's environmental problems and the effort to address them, to solve them to the extent that's possible. But there is one really burning question. Is this enough? Is it enough to stop the waste of, the evaporation of water, the melting of glaciers? Is it enough to reduce the temperatures that are rising? What is going to be enough?
Well, my answer will be no, it's not enough. If you ask the people who are living in the coastal communities, the Caspian, of the Aral Sea, of the Lake Balkhash, of all these rivers, the ones who are the people who suffered the drought in 2021 that hit Central Asia, the people in Almaty, Tashkent, Bishkek who suffer from air pollution as was mentioned before, every year, especially during the winter months, the people who suffer from decade of hail in Turkmenistan, which hasn't been closed after like 3-4 decades. They're going to say, no, it's not enough. Whether it's being done by local governments, the United States, the World Bank, IMF, the European Union, United Nations Development Program, every other organization, no, it's not enough. Maybe there have been some successes, but I don't think that the people there will say like our situation has improved that much as compared to 10 years ago. At least that's what I get from talking to people in the region, from seeing the photos, from reading the reports. We're simply not doing enough.
Sanjay, what would be enough?
I think again, it requires change of strategy and change of our approach. Clearly, the climate change or the impact of climate change, everyone thinks it's government's responsibility to respond to it. And the government, I think there has to be recognition that it is change is needed at all levels. And in order to address, no government, however rich, will be able to bring in enough resources or enough intervention. Even we as an institution, we are very clear that we cannot solve this problem all by ourselves. So 3 things are needed primarily from our side. One is partnership, I guess. So private sector need to play a role, USAID, other bilaterals, other partners, everyone need to be part of the same narrative. I think sometimes we tend to replicate each other. So I think that partnership. Second is on the knowledge sharing. If there is better sharing of the knowledge, there will be huge efficiency in terms of working towards a common plan. Because sometimes, as the gentleman indicated, Afghanistan's plan is very different from what Kazakhstan's plan is. So can there be better collaboration and cooperation? And that is where I think, U.S. government can play a very critical role. We as an institution try to do more on the development side, but I think a better role on the knowledge sharing. Third is like bringing in private sector. End of the day, I think the solutions will become only at a scale, when you say will become enough or noticeable in terms of change, only if it becomes commercially viable. For private sector to bring in money, whether it is an agriculture sector or urban sector or water sector or energy sector, the policies have to be right. So the governments have to recognize that they can set the policy environment right so that the private sector can bring in money and that the climate becomes main developmental agenda rather than just add-on agenda. Looks like everyone does their things in a normal traditional way and thinks of climate related intervention is 10%. No, the climate intervention has to become 10% and everything else can become 10%. So that's how. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any last words, Larry?
Well, thank you. I'll just follow up on your question. I certainly agree with Mr. Sanchez and Srivastava. I think what we need are two types of change, right? We need deep behavioral change that every action that we as individuals every day carry out impact the climate to the highest levels of government, to international, to some of Mr. Sanchez's proposals for international high-level summits and discussions. The other change is technological change, which exists and feeds in with Mr. Srivastava's recommendations for the private sector. Your data on Central Asian being highly intensive for carbon emissions as well as the water inefficiencies, that's something near term, perhaps investment could help, because right now we're just trying as best as we can to stop some of the bleeding. I would like to add one other area and aspect to consider is the do no harm aspect. Because there are current investments that happen every day in the region. Just consider the investment in connecting mountainous areas, particularly PRC's investments coming through high mountain areas. How do you do that on a good day? Then you add to the fact that there's destabilization because there's all kinds of blasting going on, whether it's for the dam or for the road, whether you're going through the tunnel, but the ice is no longer holding the mountainsides together. So, you're starting a super negative feedback loop under the climate situation. If you start blasting through infrastructure, what does that number of landslides, the lack of the soil's capacity to absorb and retain water. So you're coming closer and closer if we haven't already passed the tipping point. So do no harm. So, but thank you. Thank you so much again to Margarita and the Jamestown Foundation.
Thank you very much. It was a great panel. Let me thank very many presentations today. Let me invite Peter Martis to come and close our forum today.
Last week was, I think, 18 years since I wrote my first piece for Jamestown, and it was on coal in China and the health costs that came with it and the resulting drag on the economy. And if I think about it, of everything that I've written in the last 18 years, that's probably the one that I remember most, because it connected these bigger issues that we associate with, strategy and the policy discussions that take place in a lot of think tanks, with the human aspects of how do you make a life, how do you live. And I think today's two panels reminded me just how much these big questions are connected to what seem to be small things, and that it is in some ways the quality of life and how you preserve that and how you make that is really driving some big issues here. There are complex moral and strategic trade-offs that come through this. That, do you create new dependencies? Do you reinforce old pathways? And in doing so, do you undermine the spirit of trying to retain sovereignty that the Central Asian states have tried to maintain and to free themselves of the Soviet legacy? And so, as I look at it and some of the things that have been said today, one of the pieces that still needs to be there is call it an objective common ground about the facts and what can be understood, since many of the different actors seem to be going down different paths in some ways that has affected their willingness to cooperate with each other and to have, a genuine, C5 plus type solution. And then, this issue of the private sector keeps coming up, in part because that's where the building capacity is. And yet, as you pointed out, and do no harm, right? There are a number of ways in which PRC companies are the predominant ones. If you go through the World Bank, for example, 50% of the construction contracts are to PRC companies that bring along some of the same issues, to say nothing of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and how that works. But I think it's a reminder that when we don't defend and protect the values that underpin those international organizations or those lending institutions, that you end up in a place where they're no longer serving the purpose that they should, and they've sort of drifted from their mission, becoming political tools rather than ones that strengthen development, strengthen the quality of life, and in some very real senses, protect the sovereignty of the countries that are involved. So anyways, thank you all for a very interesting day. I want to thank Brian Simler of the State Department for kicking us off with some thoughtful remarks, and the point that even if you don't hear about it from the National Security Advisor or Secretary of State, or it's not on CNN or Face the Nation, that there are in fact a number of things that the US government is doing on a day-to-day basis that matter or can contribute. It's useful to hear that, because it's very easy to criticize. It's often quite hard to do. And hopefully we're able to find some way to do a bit more. I also want to thank all of our panelists, the few ones from our previous panel, for contributing to this rich discussion. I really appreciate the opportunity to learn today. So even when I was out of the room for most of this panel, I was still listening downstairs in our offices. So thank you all for our panelists for a great day, and a lot of information and a lot of thought-provoking things to take back and to consider, and to figure out what is enough and how do we get there. And also, I want to give a particular thanks to Margarita Asanova for pulling this together. She's just been a wonderful guide here at Jamestown. Those of you who know her are not going to be surprised that she gets a little uncomfortable being thanked this way, but it is, she is truly an exceptional person in the way that she shapes panels, brings people together, and helps execute. So a great deal of the smoothness of the events, that thanks goes to Margarita. And I would be remiss if I did not thank Josh Haney for his work in, again, making sure that the mechanics of the conference have come together, that things work, and whatever sort of little hiccups can be there are smoothed over and addressed. Lastly, thank you all of you for attending and spending this day with us. Really appreciate it, and hope to see you at future Jamestown events. So thank you very much.